Can neuroscience define the soul? Oof, this one might be a little controversial. The soul isn't something that we can actually isolate, scan, or measure in the brain. Even with research into near-death experiences and psychedelic states, science hasn't found a structure called the soul. So the closest we can get are insights into consciousness and where in the brain this experience seems to arise. So they're doing studies on the neural correlates of consciousness. So where in the brain exactly, which neural networks are associated with consciousness, seem to point to something called the posterior cortical hot zone. So sensory regions in the parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes, basically everywhere except the frontal lobe. Interestingly, research on meditating monks shows the deactivation of the parietal lobe during deep spiritual states, linked to a loss of self-boundaries. So the part of our brain that's most associated with consciousness is deactivated in this deep meditative state. And then even when it comes to consciousness, there are multiple theories. One of them is called the global workspace theory, and it says that consciousness arises from information broadcasted across multiple brain regions, creating a unified experience by integrating sensory and cognitive processes, which sounds pretty logical, right? It gets a little bit more radical, though. The orchestrated objective reduction theory proposes that quantum processes within neuronal microtubules may generate consciousness itself. But the question of whether the soul exists beyond mere neural activity and even beyond consciousness, it's still open. What science can observe is the feeling of the self, built from networks like the default mode network, the insula, and the prefrontal cortex, like we've already been discussing. Interestingly, all those areas are mostly not part of this posterior cortical hot zone that's associated with the raw experience of consciousness. And they've proven that with experiments on people who've had damage to their prefrontal cortex that do experience consciousness. So no, neuroscience can't yet define the soul, but it hasn't disproven it either.